All right, I am live on YouTube and just want to say good morning to everyone. Still morning out my way. I sitting back drinking some coffee and figured I would do some podcasting today. I have a topic in mind and something that I've been wanting to speak about for a while. I released a video for for TikTok, and I released it on Instagram as well concerning Leonard Peltier and his parole hearing that came and passed. And anyway, just want to give an update on that, and then also talk about Leonard Peltier's situation. So we're going to get our podcast going right about now. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's go. All right, welcome back to the Seven Generation Podcast. This is Dr. B. Hope everyone is doing well out there. I don't know about you and where you're located, wherever you're listening to this, but it is hot. It is hot. The temperature has been turned up, and wow, it's over 110 out my way. So just been staying indoors, been dealing with a back injury, a pretty serious back injury, and fortunately been in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, but it has given me time to podcast. So just trying to take advantage of some of the free time that I have. But yeah, just really looking forward to getting my body right again. Hopefully, I can do so quickly. Um, so today's episode focus is going to be on Leonard Peltier and the 49-year injustice of his imprisonment. Okay, that's how I see it. There's a lot of different views of Leonard that people have, even within the indigenous community. There's a lot of people who support Leonard in his release, and there's even some who don't. And I just want to kind of jump into uh, some of the recent developments and then talk about maybe some of the specifics of his case. I'm not an expert by all means in Leonard's situation, but just kind of tell you a story that I have told this story before concerning Leonard and the American Indian movement. Is learning about AIM, learning about Leonard's case was very impactful in my life. Years ago, there was a book that was published by Peter Mathiasen called In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. And the FBI did its best to ban the book. They did everything to keep the book from hitting the bookstores, but it was eventually released. I think it took 5 or 6 years of litigation to get the book out there, but it was released, and it told the story of the American Indian movement and Leonard's situation. And I picked up that book when I think it was maybe 17, 18 years old. It was actually given to me by a friend of mine. And at that time, I had never read anything. I was not well read at all. I would even say I wasn't even a reader. I didn't read. I uh, wasn't the best student in elementary or high school. Was not an avid reader at all, and ended up becoming a big fan of reading. You kind of have to read when you're going to college. At least you did when I was going to college. I don't know about if these students are reading anymore, but I love books. I love to read, love to learn, and I think that there's something to be said about just building your vocabulary, your intelligence, just from picking up books. And I know it's very much a, uh, a Western concept, but uh, I feel like it's helped me out so much just in my own personal development, just reading, just exercising my mind. So I try to read as much as I can. I try to read every day a little bit. But when I first picked up this book, I didn't read it all. And mind you, it's like a 400, 500 page book. I don't know. When it was handed to me, I'm like, there's no way I'm reading this book. There's just no way. And then I picked it up and I started to read it, and I could not put this book down. The first time in my life that I ever read anything that was of interest to me. And it was all about, again, the American Indian movement and Leonard's case. And that was the first time I had ever heard of some of these situations. I had heard of AIM before. I had heard about the Alcatraz takeover as a kid. I knew a little bit about the activism. Some of that stuff had been passed on to me. My mom had come out to California from Colorado around the time. She was a teenager around the time of the Alcatraz takeover. And I heard stories about, and when she came out to California, she came to the Bay. And of course, that was just big news out there in the Native community. And a lot of Native Americans were relocated to the Bay Area, to San Francisco, Oakland area, including people in my family. So I had heard about the Alcatraz takeover, heard about Richard Oakes and what had happened to him, the killing of Richard Oakes. And maybe one of these days I can do a podcast on that and talk about his situation, what happened to him. But I didn't really know much about AIM. I didn't really know anything about the American Indian movement. I heard about it, but no details. But when I picked up this book, I couldn't put it down. And I remember staying up all night. One night, I read till like 5 a.m. And I could not. It was so compelling. The story, for me at least, it was such a compelling story. And this book changed my life forever. It changed me, completely set me on a different path. And I just wasn't the same person after learning about what the FBI had done, learning a little bit about COINTELPRO, and of course learning about the American Indian movement and some of the struggles taking place around the country, and the takeover of Wounded Knee, the second Wounded Knee, and I think that was 1973. Man, the takeover of the BIA office in Washington, D.C., like a lot of that stuff, I just didn't know any of that history. And I didn't know the history of Leonard. But that book had a really big impact on me. And I had wrote letters to the president, various presidents, asking for his clemency. And I had written Leonard as well. Anyway, so I've been following the case for so many years, and I really had thought, I really had thought that by now Leonard would have been released from prison. And there's just so much more to the story than what I even learned in the book, and things I have learned later. There's a lot of complexities to the story, but the reality is he's been spending the last 49 years behind bars, at least connected to the criminal justice system. The firefight took place in 1975 on the Jumping Bull compound. This is where 2 FBI agents are killed. John Collier, and Ronald Williams. They were shot and killed. And they were investigating apparently a stolen pair of cowboy boots. And Jimmy Eagle was the suspect. They thought they were following him potentially. Anyway, a firefight took place. These 2 agents were killed. Joseph Stuntz was killed as well, Native American. He was also killed in the firefight. And it led to one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. And eventually, some suspects were apprehended. Bob Robidoux and Dino Butler were eventually tried and found not guilty by means of self-defense. So Bob Robidoux, Dino Butler, who were at the Jumping Bull compound were found not guilty. And Leonard probably would have been tried with him, but he had fled to Canada, and he was captured in Canada, and the FBI wanted him extradited back to the United States, and he wasn't extradited in time for the trial. He would later be extradited and tried separately. So the first trial was in Cedar Rapids, South Dakota, and Bob, Robidoux, Dino Butler were found not guilty of the murder of the two FBI agents, and they went free. And then later, Leonard Peltier was extradited illegally through the Myrtle Poorbear affidavit. So the FBI had coerced this woman, Native woman, to claim that she was Leonard's girlfriend and that he admitted to doing the killings and so on. Well, Leonard didn't even know this person. We know that the woman was coerced into giving this bullshit story about being Leonard's girlfriend, Leonard having admitted to killing the agents. Anyway, they were able to extradite him back. He was tried in Minnesota, Fargo. He was tried in Fargo, North Dakota. So he was found guilty of aiding and abetting the murder of the two FBI agents and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the killing of these agents. And there's just so much about the story that is disturbing to me, and just the level of corruption on part of the FBI. Also, what was taking place all around Indian country at the time. And, the American Indian movement was very, very controversial because these guys were incredibly radical. A lot of them weren't traditional. A lot of them had spent time in jail, spent time in prison. Many of the members of AIM were survivors of the boarding school system, including Leonard Peltier. He had gone through the boarding school system as well. And if you know anything about the horrors of the boarding school system, you know that a lot of these kids came out traumatized. And there was just a lot of historical trauma. Many of these communities all Native communities were experiencing. And the creators of AIM, which was created in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back in the early 60s, was created to fight police brutality, which was a big problem for Native people who had been relocated via the Relocation Act, which was a congressional act that was passed in the 1950s that were moving Native people off the reservation into the inner cities, where they were basically living in very similar conditions that they grew up in, except for now it was in the inner city. And so these relocation programs were designed to get Native Americans off the reservation, really to destroy the nationhood status. There were a lot of different laws that were passed: relocation, termination. It was all meant to do away with the federal status that Native American nations, tribal nations, have with the federal government. So you had all these natives who were being raised up in these inner cities. Many of them were being harassed by the police and were having a lot of difficulties making it. Some of these folks ended up in jail. And these are the folks who create AIM, create the American Indian movement. And they have a completely different outlook, different philosophy. It's a very similar to Malcolm X's By Any Means Necessary. And again, I'm not doing the history justice, and I don't even claim to be an expert in any of this. I've been obviously reading up on Native activism for quite a few years, but I don't claim to be an expert in anything, just so you know. I would always tell people as well, don't take my word for anything. If you think there's something out there something that I've said that isn't correct or isn't accurate, research it for yourself. And there might be some things I'm not quite as informed on. But I do know that the movement was definitely very controversial, and you had a lot of wild youngsters, people were really eager to get out there and do something in the community. And some of these individuals were not always doing the right thing, and some of them made a lot of mistakes. And there were a lot of communities didn't like AIM. There were some that wanted AIM to come out and to help out. For example, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, AIM was asked to come out and help. So that's why Leonard was out there. And there were a lot of murders taking place on Pine Ridge, dozens, in fact, in a short period of time. There's a lot of tension between the tribal governments that were being backed by the federal government, supposedly, and AIM members, these agitators, these radicals, and so forth. But Leonard Peltier gets caught up in the mix. He is Turtle Mountain, Chippewa, and he goes to the boarding school system. He is able to get somewhat of an education. He does a lot of working class jobs, ends up moving to Washington. I think he spends some time as a mechanic, spends some time in Arizona, and he sees the oppression and the discrimination that Native people are faced with, all of which is still ongoing, by the way. And he ends up joining AIM, and he's not like a high-ranking member or leader in AIM, and he's never viewed as somebody of major importance. But of course, his name becomes synonymous with AIM as a result of the shootout that took place on the Jumping Bull compound, our ranch, the Jumping Bull Ranch. But he ends up becoming involved again with AIM. And I know I'm trying to make sure I get as much information, give you guys as much context as possible. He gets involved with AIM. He ends up at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where again, there's a tremendous amount of violence taking place there. Countless Native Americans, AIM members, AIM supporters that are killed. Many of those cases never solved. And this is where the self-defense defense comes into play for the trial with Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux. And the judge at the time, he allows them to use that defense because it's such a violent period, and there's just so much suspicion of anybody because so many people have been killed. And when these agents pull up and they're following this truck, and they think it's Jimmy Eagle. And again, they're investigating a pair of cowboy boots, which I'm not even sure they have jurisdiction over that. But there's literally dozens and dozens of agents that are out here on these reservations who are watching AIM. There's the COINTELPRO movement that we later learn about, which is a program within the FBI, which is meant to destabilize and destroy movements like AIM and the Brown Berets, the Black Panther Party, Dr. King's movement, and so forth. And so there's a lot of dirty business, a lot of antics, a lot of FBI corruption to go along with, again, the violence that Native people are experiencing. And so what AIM is trying to do is address some of these issues. They're trying to address police brutality, the poverty experienced by Native people, and they're doing their best to help traditional people out at Pine Ridge to deal with the Dick Wilson administration and the so-called Goon Squad, the Guardians of the Oglala Nation, who are terrorizing people out there. So that's the context of the situation that Leonard finds himself in. And as a result of these two FBI agents being killed, as a result of Dino Butler, Bob Robidoux being found not guilty, the FBI, the federal government, I'm sure they're pissed, and they're looking to get someone, and that someone is Leonard. And so they're able to extradite him back. Again, this bullshit affidavit Myrtle Poorbear affidavit. Do your research on that, and you'll just see how ridiculous that is. But they're able to get him back, and they're determined to get Leonard. They are determined to get him. So the second trial is in Fargo, North Dakota. It's a different judge. He doesn't allow Leonard's defense to use the self-defense that was used in the first trial. And the sad thing about this whole situation, if Leonard had come back, he probably would have been tried with Dino Butler and Bob Robidoux, and he probably would have been found not guilty. Just sad. Situation's just incredibly sad. But anyway, he eventually is found guilty of the murder, the two murders, and he's convicted. Now, what's kind of confusing, and I always thought he was convicted of the murder, but because of the different court hearings that have happened since the first conviction, he is serving 2 life sentences for aiding and abetting the murder of the 2 FBI agents. Now, aiding and abetting who? Nobody knows. But even the FBI, the prosecutors, admit that they don't know who killed the 2 FBI agents. And some of the judges that have heard the case that upheld the conviction have even asked for clemency on his behalf. The ballistic evidence, we know, was withheld. We know that the FBI knew that the AR-15, the rifle that was connected to Leonard, that the shell casings found near the vehicle where the 2 FBI agents were killed, that those shell casings didn't come from Leonard's rifle. And so the government even says they don't know exactly who killed the FBI agents, and that Leonard is not convicted of their murder, but of aiding and abetting the murder of the 2 FBI agents. So there's just so much misconduct, coerced testimonies. I mean, people were paid to testify, evidence tampering on the part of the FBI. And this is what really, I think, changed my life forever, because I always felt there, growing up as a youngster, I always felt there was some kind of injustice, that this America that was always held up as this, beacon of democracy and freedom and justice for all. Like, I knew that was nonsense. I knew that was all BS. And then reading about what happened to Leonard, reading about the American Indian movement, it pretty much kind of solidified, and I guess gave me just so much history and context of things I already felt growing up. It wasn't like I had I grew up feeling that life was fair. I grew up feeling life wasn't fair, and that there wasn't much equality, and there wasn't much justice in this world, just from the things that I saw growing up, and the discrimination and the racism I experienced, the discrimination, the racism I saw other natives experience as well. It was definitely an eye-opener after learning about the case, learning about Leonard's situation. Of course, from there on, I always wanted Leonard to be released. But he was convicted, and he was sent to jail, and he's been in jail ever since. And it's just incredible to me. And he just recently had a parole hearing. He's 79 years old. He's not well. He's sick. How he has survived all these years behind bars. I mean, imagine that. He's going to be 80 years old. He's almost spent 50 years in prison. It's unbelievable. And 50 years in prison for aiding and abetting the murder of 2 FBI agents. And they don't even know if he's the one who killed the agents. And he claims that he didn't kill the agents. I don't believe that he did. So he maintains his innocence. And I think one of the, things that he was asked in an interview, or one of the questions he was asked is like, are you guilty of killing the agents? He says, no, the only thing I'm guilty of is trying to help my people. There's so many organizations and so many politicians who've asked for clemency for Leonard, but the federal government, the various presidents, I had thought Clinton was going to grant him clemency. That didn't happen. I thought for sure Barack Obama would grant him clemency. Nope. Trump, no. And now we're hinging our hope on Biden. But this man has spent, again, close to 50 years in prison. And it's just such a tragedy. It really, really is. The conditions of his imprisonment are not good. Again, has a lot of health issues, lack of medical care. He has been attacked repeatedly over the years. And so he has experienced a lot of violence behind bars. He did release a book called My Life is My Sundance, Prison Writings. You can check that out if you want to learn more about Leonard, his life growing up, some of his thoughts. But there's no good reason why he should be in prison today. There just isn't. He's not a threat to society. He's not a threat to anybody. He's an old man. He's an old man with a wrecked body. How his spirit remains as strong as it does, I don't even know. And again, he wasn't seen as this great Native American leader. He was just a warrior, and he did a lot of the dirty work that's done in a lot of social movements. He wasn't out front leading. He wasn't a spokesperson. He wasn't like John Trudell or Dennis Banks or Russell Means. But because of the situation, he's become somewhat of a martyr. And but his case definitely highlights just how ugly our government can be, how cruel our government can be, lack of compassion. I mean, you name it. And Leonard's imprisonment also reflects just broader issues of systemic injustice, ongoing injustice, and the struggle for justice, recognition of indigenous human rights, and so forth. And I'm just disgusted. I feel really sad for Leonard, for his family, for the people that care about him. Even if he did murder the 2 FBI agents. And I want to talk about that too, because there are some people who believe he did. He did pull the trigger. Even if he did, I still feel like he should have been released long ago. And people have no clue the conditions, the living conditions out at Pine Ridge and living conditions on most Native American reservations at this time are just absolutely horrendous, as they still are in some cases today. And I just learned about a story that disturbed me concerning what's still happening on some reservations, and I'm gonna release a video on that story. I'm gonna work on it possibly today after I do this podcast. But it is just incomprehensible to me. What is the reason for having this man behind bars? And some people say it's the fear of the FBI. The FBI has done a lot in terms of spreading their misinformation, their propaganda to keep Leonard behind bars. There's a major concern on the part of the FBI. They want him to die in prison. Again, we don't know. The federal government acknowledges there's so many people who've worked that case, judges who have called for his release, for his clemency. There's a district judge by the name, I want to read this to you. Let's see here. there's a district judge that's been working on his case since he retired, and I definitely um, see if I can find this. I had it here. Let's see. Yeah. So there's a former attorney and U.S. district judge from Tennessee, a guy by the name of Kevin Sharp. And he didn't know anything about the Peltier case, but he was given the a brief on it. It was sent to him, and he decided that he would take on the case and try to help him get clemency. And he I've listened to him talk, but there's something I can read to you about what he says about Leonard's case. His Pine Ridge was a powder keg with the goon squad operating there with the government's help. And so a lot of people don't know is that the the FBI, the federal government, was providing intelligence, was possibly providing firearms as well to the goon squad to help eliminate AIM. He goes on to say AIM was there to protect those who were not a part of the goon squad. There were many murders and assaults in a 3-year time frame. And out at Pine Ridge, excuse me. So just to add something to that. So out at Pine Ridge at this time, they have the highest murder rate per capita. It's just incredible the amount of violence that's taking place out there. So he goes on to say, when plainclothes agents and unmarked cars arrived, a firefight ensued. So when these agents come out, they're not in traditional FBI gear. I think even one of the agents was wearing moccasins, which is crazy. So he goes on to say Leonard did not shoot the agents, and the FBI knew this but withheld evidence. The Court of Appeals acknowledged this but couldn't overturn the conviction due to legal standards. Judge Heaney, who wrote the opinion, later supported clemency for Leonard. Now, 38 of Judge Haney's former clerks support parole for Leonard, including 3 who worked on his case. The government admits they don't know who killed the agents, but it wasn't Leonard. It's time to release Leonard and start the healing process. Now, again, this is a former U.S. district judge from Tennessee, a guy by the name of Kevin Sharp, who's been working on Leonard's case. So, again, what we know is that the FBI coerced a lot of testimony, a lot of people who testified against Leonard under duress. There were people who were even paid to testify against him. The Myrtle Poor affidavit was all falsified. The ballistic evidence does not show or indicate that Leonard's rifle is connected to the killing of the 2 agents. But yet, Leonard's still behind bars. It's just incomprehensible to me. Yeah, it's just crazy. Now, there's more to this situation. The story is just such an incredible story. Leonard actually does escape from prison in 1979. He escapes from Lompoc, which is in California. It's a prison not too far from where I live. And he remained at large for, I believe, 3 or 4 days. And eventually he was apprehended. And he was, I think, convicted of additional crimes as well during his. So it's the case is just. I mean, this is really it's an unbelievable situation. The history of the case is just absolutely incredible. But he's been denied clemency several times. He's been denied parole. The latest parole hearing, some people had described that as probably Peltier's last chance to be free, to become free. And I had really had had my hopes up that he would be able to come home. And for a lot of years when I was uh, well, when I was young and I was going through college, I was really a big, a really big supporter. I really followed Leonard's case real closely, and I thought at the end of Clinton's his presidency that he would be released. And I remember we got together that night, and there was a lot of us that we got together, we prayed for Leonard, and we really thought he was going to come home. And of course, he was ended up being denied clemency last minute. So yeah, it's maddening. It's really sad. Um, I think it's really important that we don't forget about Leonard's situation, that we continue to even though he's behind bars and he's suffering, he's old, he's sick, just don't forget about him. And I really do encourage listeners to educate yourself about the government corruption, the lack of compassion, and the hatred and the Indian hating that has been taking place since settler colonialism has set in as a structure here on what we call Turtle Island. Because it's really unbelievable, the racism, the discrimination, the injustice, the violence, the level of violence towards Native people. Also, the length that the federal government will go to destroy any type of social movement that's seen as a threat to the state of affairs, threat to business, threat to capitalism. And what the government has done, not just to Leonard, but to Native people, it's just reprehensible. It just is. It's reprehensible. It's disgusting. It's sickening. And there's no reason why he should be behind bars. He's not going to live much longer. And it's just, it makes me sick that he even spent this much time in prison. Now, there are some additional thoughts that I do want to share about his situation, or just about Leonard in general. Now, there are some people who have supposedly have come forward and said that Leonard admitted to killing the two FBI agents. And there's also Anna Mae. Anna Mae was an activist, an AIM activist. She was Mi'kmaq. And she was murdered. She was found killed. And she was killed by members of the American Indian movement. And there are a couple of people who have been sentenced to prison for her death. Arlo Looking, Cloud, John Graham were charged with the murders of Anna Mae, and they're serving life sentences for her murder. And there's a lot of information, I think, that we haven't really learned about when it comes to the American Indian movement and some of the problems within the movement, the different groups competing maybe for who has a say in the movement, and also the FBI's tactics, the COINTELPRO program, and how the FBI went about trying to destroy these movements. And there's a lot of people who say that Anna Mae was bad jacketed, meaning that the FBI tried to target her as an informant, tried to get people to think she was an informant, and there were people within the movement apparently who had interrogated Anna Mae. It's just such a sad, really sad story, but that there are witnesses that have come forward and said that Anna Mae was interrogated about being an FBI informant, and that she was murdered soon after that. And that apparently there was during one interrogation, there was a time where Leonard had put a gun in her mouth. And anyway, it's a very sad situation. But Arlo Looking Glass, he's Oglala Lakota. He was tried. He was convicted of her murder. And um, the prosecution did argue that Ames' suspicion stemmed from Anna Mae Aquash having supposedly overheard Leonard saying that he admitted that he had killed the two FBI agents. And there's others who had said that they had heard Leonard say this as well. But again, a lot of this information that's been put out there by these individuals is questionable. And I don't want to get too much into it because, again, I don't know all the facts and all the details of it, but it just seems all very, very sketchy to me. But what doesn't seem sketchy is the FBI and the COINTELPRO program doing everything to destabilize the American Indian movement. And that's one of the tactics. And there was an informant, a guy by the name of Douglas Duran or Jimmy Duran. I can't remember his name exactly, but he was an undercover informant, and he'd become an AIM member. And I think AIM was very fearful of being infiltrated by the FBI, and there was just a lot of suspicion. This is what happened to a lot of social movements during the 1960s and the 1970s. The FBI was infiltrating, was trying to get information, was doing everything to destroy these movements from within, and bad jacketing, creating suspicion between members and creating division. All of this was part of the COINTELPRO program, counterintelligence program. Again, it was meant to destroy any kind of social movement that was viewed as a threat to national security, threat to capitalism, threat to business as usual. So again, there are some people. There was one lady, and Darlene Nichols, who did testify that Peltier had said he had killed the agents, but there's also some evidence that she was paid, that she was given money, and I believe she's even married to an FBI agent, a former FBI agent today. So a lot of that stuff is just sketchy. But Peltier was not involved in the murder in this sense that he didn't kill Anna Mae. But there are some people who despise Peltier because they believe that he was connected in some way to her murder, whether he had interrogated her, or there are some people believe that Anna Mae Aquash had heard Leonard saying that he had killed the two agents, and they were fearful that maybe she would come forward and testify, and as a result, she was killed. And I know that the family of Anna Mae, they hate Leonard, and of course they don't want to see him be released from prison. They feel like he was connected to her murder in some way. And I will say this: we do know that the American Indian movement, they had Anna Mae killed. Members of that movement had her killed. And again, it's just a horrible, sad situation. The American Indian movement was, I know that they've been romanticized and they've been glorified to a certain extent, but the reality is we're talking about human beings, talking about people who are flawed, and people who are dealing with their own trauma and their own issues. And again, American Indian movement was not your peace and love movement. They were by any means necessary, and they were involved in a lot of physical, violent confrontations with the federal government. And I don't have time to get into every single situation they were involved in, but these people took a stance, and they were not afraid to fight, and they were not afraid to be aggressive. And that's not always the Indian way. It's not the way for a lot of people. A lot of people saw them as agitators, like, man, life is hard as it is, and now these guys are coming along and they're making life more difficult. But there is a dark cloud over Leonard in this sense. Anna Mae was killed. She was a member of the organization, and we do know that the murder, the sexual assault of Native women is an incredible problem that has been going on again since 1492. The MMIW movement raises issues related to the violence and in some cases the murder and disappearance of Indigenous women. And there are some people who do blame, they blame Leonard for at least having some kind of role in the killing of Anna Mae. And the killing of her is just brutal. And also too, and I want to do more. I do want to talk about Anna Mae. I want to spend a lot of time doing research, and I want to do a video on Anna Mae's situation because Anna Mae was a brilliant thinker. She was an amazing person. She was a fighter. She was a warrior, and she was a very, very traditional person, and she really wanted to do something for her people. She involved herself with AIM. She chose to be with these so-called radicals. And again, the story is really, really complex, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm still learning about, stuff that I read about. But regardless of what happened to Anna Mae, and again, I'm not saying all these different situations are interconnected, but Anna Mae was not killed by Leonard. Now, did he interrogate her? I don't know. But from my understanding, he did. And he did threaten her, held a gun in her mouth, apparently. And yeah, I could see how the family would not want Leonard to be released. Anna Mae left behind family who love her, care about her, and want her name never to be forgotten. And she was not given, according to her family, from what I have read, she was not given a proper burial. What was told to the family, at least according to what the family says, she was not buried in a proper way. And I think there's a lot of animosity. Again, it's just a lot of pain, a lot of suffering all around. Suffering for Anna Mae's family, her community, people who miss her daughters who lost their mother. A lot of suffering for Leonard and his family as well. He has grandchildren, and he has people who love him and care about him. All kinds of suffering that Native people have experienced for centuries now. And I just think that Leonard's release would begin some kind of healing. And his continued imprisonment, to me, makes zero sense. It just does. It makes zero sense. It just does. But Leonard remains behind bars. And there's a good chance that he's going to die there. He's going to die in prison. And I know we should never give up hope, but it's just so frustrating to me. I know that the Indian Collective and so many other organizations have been out there supporting Leonard. Nick Tilson, they had a rally recently after his parole was denied. Are people who have walked on his behalf, who have done everything. A lot of youngsters now are learning more about Leonard's case. I grew up knowing about Leonard ever since I read that book, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. So I've always known about Leonard, and I've been a supporter of him. But I know that the times that I have spoken out, and I try to be very careful, the times that I have spoken out, I've had people who are very familiar with Anna Mae's situation and her murder and the role that AIM played in her death. Again, it's just an ugly situation, and Anna Mae should not be forgotten. and to the community, to the family, my heart goes out to them too, because I can't imagine that kind of suffering, and I just can't imagine again knowing that your own people killed a relative. So it's a really terrible situation, and it's hard for me to talk about. But it's weighed on me the last couple of weeks. I've been going through this back injury, and my back injury has really been a big hindrance in my ability to move around. So I've just had a lot of time to think, and I had really hoped for not for clemency, for the parole commission to grant him release. And when I'd heard recently that it was denied, it was just a gut punch to so many people. So where do we go from here? Well, clemency is still a possibility. I'm hoping that I really do hope that our government does grant him his release, that he doesn't die behind bars. But there is a chance that he will. And what can we do? Well, I mean, we can write our local politicians. I don't know how much that helps. There is a number that you can text that asks for Leonard's clemency. There's a good chance that Biden will lose the election, and would he grant clemency? I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I hope you guys learned something from this podcast, and like I said, it's hard to talk about. It's hard for me to, especially with the situation with anime, and I try to tread lightly there. And like I said, when I had done a few videos on Leonard and I had talked about his case, I've had people bring up anime, and I have done videos on anime as well, explaining her situation. And I would like to do something more, but I need to just do more research about her and try to figure out how to do something. If I want to put something out, that it's done the right way, and just remembering her and her life and what she contributed to the movement, what she contributed to Indigenous human rights, the fight and the struggle for Indigenous human rights. So I guess that's a good place to end, end the show, is that, we have to continue to struggle against any kind of injustice, and these stories. History is very, very complex. There's multiple angles to Leonard's case. I will say that when Native people get together and they pray for Leonard, they also pray for the families of Jack Collar and Ronald Williams. They pray for them as well. They pray for healing for them. So there is a lot of compassion on the part of Native people for the family members of the FBI agents, because there's been a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And that's the thing, is when, somebody gets killed, somebody's murdered, the people who have to carry on that pain, or the people who carry that pain, who carry the heartache of their losing their family member. I just can't imagine that kind of suffering. And for the families of the two FBI agents, just like I can't imagine the suffering of Anna Mae's daughter and her community as well. So, but I think all of us in the Native community, we all have experiences with this to some degree, whether it's the violence, having lost loved ones, having seen uh, the oppression, the destruction of settler colonialism at work. So, all right, y'all. This is the Seven Generation Podcast, and I hope everyone continues to have. Let's see what I got here. Just looking at my podcast machines giving me a message. Sorry about that. But yeah, this is Seven Generation Podcast. Appreciate y'all tuning in, and I will be back real soon. All right, I'm still on YouTube, still live here on YouTube, and sorry for that ending, but my podcast machine was giving me a message, some kind of error message. I don't even know. I couldn't really read it. I'm hoping that my recording is okay. I'd hate to have to record this again, but if anything, I should be able to get the audio from this as well, and I could work with it. But I might have to work on that ending a bit. It wasn't really the way I wanted to end the show, but anyway, the adventures of podcasting. I don't run like some expensive podcast. I know we have some people, who are watching the show right now. It's pretty much just me, and I handle the production side and the audio side, and pretty much everything. So I don't get paid to do this. I do it because I enjoy it, because I love to podcast. But yeah, this was a tough one, and I hope some of you got something from it. I don't know. I can read the comment section here. A lot of comments. Wow. Yeah, some people say free Leonard now, Indigenous reparations now, 49 years, heartbreaking. Longest serving political prisoner in history. International law says people can defend race, resist by any means necessary. It's true. Goon Squad. Just hearing about this sounds like the government was part of trying to destroy AIM, but don't know for sure, but it sounds that way. Sure does. Yep. Think all the sick explicitive that have received presidential pardon, yet Leonard still seen behind prison. Yeah. Stolen boots. Yeah, can you believe that? A pair of stolen boots, man. It's just crazy to me. I'm not even sure they have jurisdiction over that. FBI rats undermine every movement. Yeah, pretty much. Evidence withheld. USA total shit show. This is true. Let's see, too. Yeah. It says to left the native people out of poor classes, not colleges. We need people in trade schools to build Navajo Nation. I don't disagree with that. I really don't. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. This country doesn't follow its own laws. Very true. Yeah, natives not allowed to speak their language, practice their own religion. That's actually happening even today. USA doesn't respect any laws that impede the agenda. I think I know where you're going with that, and I agree. Yeah. Let's see here. U.S. cops violate human rights daily. I agree with that. Fred Hampton was killed hours after he defended Bobby Seale in the U.S. courtroom. That's a whole nother, man. The case of Fred Hampton is just terrifying. That was just straight up an assassination. The Fred Hampton situation is another one I encourage people to look into. Yeah, most people don't know about Leonard's case. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't know within the Native community. He was just kind of lost. Um, settler colonial injustice. And a lot of comments here. Um, yeah, Leonard Peltier. That's his full name. Man, I really do appreciate all the comments, y'all. I know we have people who are um, still listening. Yeah, appreciate the comments, y'all. I think it's time for me to head out. I need to stand. Like I said, I have this really horrible back injury right now. It's good for me to get moving around from time to time. So I try to sit for a little bit and move around. So I appreciate you all tuning in. We're at the hour mark. If you guys like this content, if you enjoy these conversations, um, definitely let me know in the comment section. I do a lot of videos that end up being turned into shorts, and then I do some longer form content. I like to do my podcasts live on YouTube, but I just want to make sure that giving y'all what you guys want. But yeah, if you guys like the content, definitely comment, and I'll continue to do um, these podcasts here on YouTube. So what I do is I upload them later. I think I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the episodes. It's gonna take some work. I'm gonna have to be wary of prescription pain. I know I was taking some stuff early when I hurt my back. I was in so much pain. I couldn't walk. I couldn't stand without being in pain. I could barely walk. I couldn't sit without being in pain. I couldn't lay down without being in pain. It was really horrible. And I did take some meds, and I haven't been taking anything. So I've just been trying to deal with what pain I am dealing with right now. But anyway, I appreciate that. Yeah, I know it's hard. It's really hard not to, reach for ibuprofen or something. But I'm trying to stay away from, any kind of meds. But yeah, anyway, like I said, if you guys like what I'm doing here, let me know, and I'll have to go back and edit the end out, maybe do another ending to the podcast. So I don't like how the way I ended it. But I always upload my podcast. Well, I don't always do this, but I've been doing it. I take the podcasts, I upload them to Spotify, and then Spotify sends it out to Apple Podcasts and all the different major platforms. So anyway, so this will be uploaded to Spotify. I'll probably release it tomorrow, but it's going to take a little bit of work. I might have to do another ending. But with that being said, I'm out of here, y'all. Take care.